The Pat Kenny Show on News Talk.
With Mater Private Network. During current restrictions, don't ignore your health concerns. Our expert team is ready to help.
Now, included in all of this will be the phased return to office workplaces, set to begin on September the 20th, and employers will face the difficult task of adhering to strict COVID protocols and managing a blended work model for their employees. So what is the best model for blended working, and what will office work look like over the course of the coming months? I'm joined by a number of people to talk about this. Richard Grogan, employment law expert, Maeve McElwee, Director of Employment Relations at IBEC, and Peter Cosgrove, Managing Director of FutureWise. Good morning and welcome to one and all. Richard, I'll start with you, first of all. Fairly basic questions that many of the at-home workers want answered. First of all, are employers obliged to provide work-from-home alternatives, or is it entirely at their discretion whether they offer those or not?
At the present time, Pat, the answer is no, unless a person has a disability, or possibly in the case of those who have child-minding issues, that they would have to be considered. But other than that, there's no right to home working.
Interesting you say child-minding. Some employers will be listening and say, why is that my problem? That's your problem.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think what's going to happen is you're going to see employers have to look at the issue of taking that into account, but they won't be taking it into account where you have a couple and saying that one of the members can sort of work at home. It's going to be one that's going to have to be shared, and it's going to cause a lot of difficulties because there are crash problems at the present time, and there are issues that people just cannot get back to work. They're going to have to give a period of time to allow somebody organised childcare at the present time.
Yeah, that would be common sense, but Richard, but it's not the law though, is it?
No, it's not the law, and there will be people getting onto lawyers to go through the strict legal hoops of saying no, and that's the reality of what's going to happen.
Now, we know that there will be rules and regulations about having the right to ask for either working from home entirely or blended working. We don't know what shape they're going to take, but would it be the case that a worker who wants to work from home while the employer would prefer them to work in the office, that they would have to demonstrate in some way legally that their work is not inhibited in any way by that working from home model?
We're going to have to wait for the legislation. It's probably one of the issues that both the employer and the employee is going to have to look at. Then it's going to be the issue if the employer says no, this is a case that's going to go to the WRC. We're unlikely to have legislation until November. With the delays in the WRC, it'll probably be November 2022 before those kind of cases are determined. And in the meantime, the employee will have no choice but to come to the workplace. Very simple.
So if the employer is intransigent about all the difficulties that somebody has, if they say come back to the office, you've got to come back to the office.
Yes, or then the employer will be able to turn around and say, look, you've abandoned your workplace, put them through a disciplinary and they can be fired. Unfortunately, that's the reality that's going to come in.
Can an employer require vaccination as a prerequisite to coming to the office? And can the employer find out by asking the direct question, are you vaccinated?
The Return to Work protocol that came out earlier this year said, yes, you could. Then the Data Protection Commission said, no, you can't. Now the Taoiseach said, no, you can't. The position on it is that this is going to be a considerable problem, particularly even in the healthcare area, because the data protection officer in the EU has said you can only ask this information if there's a health risk assessment done and there's legislation. So even if we take somebody in the healthcare issue, come the 22nd of October, people are going to be saying, I want my records expunged on this. And unless they bring in legislation on it, even in the healthcare area, employers won't be able to ask that question.
Now, clearly, if there's a mix of vaccinated and unvaccinated people in the office, it is a health risk. You know, it doesn't even have to be demonstrated because there have been workplace outbreaks. So could an employee say, sorry, sunshine, I'm not coming back to work because you cannot guarantee me that my workplace is safe?
Yeah, this is going to be the issue that's going to come up, and effectively the government have sidestepped this problem. The question of asking who's vaccinated and who isn't vaccinated creates a huge hoo-ha of what people saying this is personal rights. But the issue for doing a health and safety assessment is, if I go back to my workplace, I've now got to do the health assessment on the basis that nobody is vaccinated, and that's for every business. And so that's going to put additional costs in with screens and the whole issue of social distancing. And by the way, there's going to be a lot of employees coming back and saying, I'm not happy working with a non-vaccinated person. I know they're not vaccinated. And the employer is going to say, you can tell me that, but I actually am allowed to know it, and I can't record it, and I can't do anything about it. So there's a bit of a mess coming there, and there's going to be lots of cases down in the WRC over this, unfortunately.
Now, can an employee ask one of their colleagues, are you vaccinated? Now, there's no guarantee that anyone will tell the truth anyway, but they could say, show me your vaccine cert. Can they do that, or is it irrelevant because the other person can just say, mind your own business?
Well, one, they can say mind your own business. Two, it's a bit irrelevant because even if the other person says, yes, there's my vaccination certificate, or says, I'm not vaccinated, the employee can't go to the employer and say anything because the employer says, well, that's very interesting, but I can't do anything about it. I still have to presume that nobody's vaccinated, or I can't take into account that that person isn't vaccinated because I'm not allowed to have that information. That's the problem that we have at the present time coming up for employers.
Now, the question of the employer having to do everything possible to ensure the safety of their employees, I mean, there's no checklist yet, but social distancing is still there until the 22nd of October, but yet companies are encouraged to open up on the 20th of September. So you've got that month-long hiatus whereby there are possible dangers for people coming back to the office.
Well, that's absolutely true. But when it comes to health and safety, it's a double-sided one on it. Both the employer and the employee have to take the appropriate safety steps. That's what the legislation says. So it's not just on the employer. The employee has to do so as well. I certainly think that you're going to see from the 20th mask wearing being compulsory in an awful lot of workplaces, even if it's only on 25% come back and then 50%. It looks like when the employer can't check on the vaccination status, then it's going to be down to mask wearing and the social distancing and very strict rules on people, being at the water cooler. It's going to be one person at a time and all of that. It's a bit of a nightmare as to how we're going to do it because the government isn't going to bring out regulations. They're going to bring out guidance, and it's very much the return to work protocol that they're talking about is not going to have any legal standing. And unless the HSA come out and bring out rules, then it's just going to be very much on your own and hope for the best.
So we are waiting rules and regulations rather than simple guidance, although the government is stressing personal responsibility is their way forward. In other words, they're not going to hold our hands for much longer. This question, I live in Navan, I work for a Dublin company. The pandemic has made me realise how hard life was. Crash drop at 6 a.m, long commute both ways. Life is so much better now with Wi-Fi and all that. Can I insist on being left at home? If not, I will consider quitting and working in a lower paid job closer to home because life is too short. Now, that prompts a question. It's an interesting life experience from that Navan listener. But when you've worked very successfully from home and demonstrated that it can be done, is there any kind of de facto thing you can say to your employer? Listen, did I serve you well in the last 12 months? Did I do my job every day? Did I not even do it better than I used to do when I was knackered after the commute? I want to stay at home. And really, you haven't got a leg to stand on.
I think what's going to happen on that part, employers are going to be looking at the individual employee, and there will be employees that they'll say, yeah, that employee has worked really well at home, and they'll say there's other employees who haven't, and they'll say to some, yes, you can, and they'll say to others, no, you can't. And somebody says, well, I'm going to get another job, and they'll say, fine. That's the reality that's going to come in, that because there's no right to this at the present time. And when the right comes in, it's going to take at least a year for the WRC to deal with all of those claims, because they're going to have the redundancy claims to deal with as well. So there's a big backlog there to be dealt with.
Now, what about the flip side? This from another texter. I really want to go back to the office. I live in a busy house share and it is a nightmare. I miss my colleagues, but our company are keeping lots of us at home until at least January 2022. So this person, he or she, wants to go back to the office. Yeah,
well, this is the other issue where contracts come in. Their contract says that my place of work is a certain place. They're now going to be entitled clearly from the 22nd of October to turn around and say, that's what my contract says. I'm not working from home anymore. I'll come to the workplace. If you don't want me to come into the workplace, well, I'll stay at home. But that's your decision to leave me at home. I don't have to do any work there.
Yeah. No, what I'm getting at is that de facto, for over a year, maybe for 18 months, the workplace has been the home. So, there was an implicit agreement. I don't know whether there's any legal standing that after so long of working in this particular place, that has become the workplace.
No, because this was an emergency situation that we were told. So the emergency is finishing, so we're back to what the contract says. And even the Taoiseach just said it last night. It's what the contract says. And if you want to go back to the workplace, you're going to be entitled to say, that's what my contract says. I want to come into the workplace. You've broken my contract. Then people could be looking for redundancy or unfair dismissal, or just, well, I'm not working from home any longer because it's not my workplace. And by the way, Pat, there's a huge amount of work to set up workplaces properly, from health and safety and GDPR and the cost of setting it up correctly. So a lot of people are not working. They're working at the kitchen table, and the last place they want to be working is the kitchen table. They want to be at a proper workstation, properly set up, and they don't have that. So they're delighted to get back to work.
Yeah. Trish in Swords says childcare is surely a non-issue. If people have been working properly from home, their kids should have been in childcare anyway. Mine were, says Trish. Well, people, have used flexi time. We had one texter on the other day saying, my work happened between 6 and 9 in the morning and between 6 and 9 at night, when but I looked after the kids all day. Anyway, we'll park that particular one. A final one for the moment, Richard, but I do want you to stay online. Can an employer insist on regular antigen tests?
Well, this is the issue. At the moment, again, we've no guidelines on this. I would have thought that coming back at the present time with the level of infection that we have, that there would be an issue in relation to antigen testing. But currently, there's no legal right on an employer to request antigen testing, and an employee can refuse, and the employer can do nothing about it. Sorry.
Okay, Richard, we await legislation, we await guidance, we await a lot of things, but Maeve McElwee, Director of Employer Relations at IBEC, has been listening in. And Maeve, the question is, what advice are you giving to your members? Is it to be as flexible as possible? I mean, you can't tell them what to do, but are you advising them?
Good morning, Pat. And I suppose maybe just first to say that the guidance yesterday evening is very welcome. So it's really great to see businesses being able to start to implement the plans that they've put in place to return people to the workplace. And for a lot of the economy that depends on people being in the office, it's great, and particularly the remainder of the experience economy. And while I appreciate some of the things that Richard is saying, they're very, there's a lot of nuance around some of these issues. So you're absolutely right. Of course, employers are looking at hybrid working. Long before the pandemic struck, we were beginning to see greater moves towards blended, remote and hybrid working. But I do think we need to recognise that everybody fully remote and hybrid working systems are entirely different animals, and we're going to see a lot of changes coming through over the next number of months as organisations settle down into their norms. Yeah. But in terms of the practical issues coming back, yes, we're seeing lots of employments, and we've been advising them, think about how you're going to bring people back, think about bringing people back in a staggered and very managed way. Look at all the protocols that need to be in place as you return people to the workplace, and engage and consult with them. There may be no right to home working, but we do know, as I say, in terms of recruitment and retention, that was something that clearly employers are going to want to engage on. They will want to keep staff who have been working really effectively remotely, but who are experienced within their businesses. So they will be looking at opportunities around talking to people, engaging with them, trying to determine what might be that best blended plan. And bear in mind,
I mean, you make
people think
go on.
What might be interesting for people right now, as they see other colleagues return to the office, they might think, well, actually, I would prefer to have a little bit more time in the office, or change up those arrangements that are currently in place too. So it'll be flexible on all sides, I think.
It's interesting, there's great competition in the tech companies for employees, and they have various perks that they offer, whether it's health insurance or free meals or whatever it might be. But the latest perk might be for experienced workers, as you say, not having to do that long commute. That might be very attractive and a way of keeping people on board who might otherwise be a bit restless about their employees. Peter Cosgrove, who is Managing Director of FutureWise. Peter, you and I have talked about the future of work and, blended working versus home working versus full-time in the office working. It's a very mixed picture, but you also have, I know you've said to me many times, beware of what you wish for. you might just get it.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Pat. I think, firstly, employers need to realise, I suppose, the last 18 months, you could argue they got to see what life could be like if they were a remote or flexible worker. But it is, as Richard said, this was an emergency situation. So if they're being asked to go back to work, like, that is an employer probably saying, you probably need to talk to that employer and work out why they want that. Because actually there's a lot of good reasons why employers need people back to work. You know, people haven't really connected properly for 18 months. So rather than start giving them legislation and thinking of the WRC, I think the starting point is trying to work with your employer. Most employers, as you said, if they're happy that you're working hard and you're being really productive, will be generous around that. But at the same time, there is lots of things that happen at work that are not to do with just tasks and productivity. And maybe we were more productive for the last 12 months because we were a little bit fearful of losing our jobs, and maybe we can keep that up. So firstly, understand why employers might want you back, because there's probably some very good reasons in the short term. That doesn't mean in the longer term they won't do it. But the second point, to refer to your comment earlier, Pat, is, you know, the reality is this is one part of technology adoption. Now that people know that they can work from home with Zoom and Wi-Fi and much better everywhere. The reality is, actually, technology is going to come for a lot of our jobs, whether it's, you know, artificial intelligence or PA. There's lots of ways that employers are going to look to reduce their workforce if they can, either by having people working in cheaper locations or having technology do the job. And one of the biggest differentiators a human has versus technology is you're not going to compete with them on speed, but you're going to compete with them on your humanity, your relationships, your ability to kind of, you know, see different things that a computer can only do one thing and we can do many things. My worry is if you're sitting behind a screen looking through a screen at other people, you're almost giving away some of that 3D image to a 2D image, and therefore you're probably losing some of that. So be careful what you wish for from the point of view that if you continue to work from home, not only are you potentially going to be a little bit more forgotten about than the employees that do come back to work, but also, you know, you might find over time that actually, you know, the work actually is something that you won't have in 4 or 5 years' time. So just be a little bit careful of it. So I would think most employees out there should think about going back to work, but should be very much thinking flexible. So I absolutely agree that people don't want to get up at 6 in the morning because of traffic, but that doesn't mean they can't say to an employer, but can I come in at 11 till 3 so I do see my colleagues most days or some days, but then there is none of this stress with work. So I think people have to think a little bit more holistically about how they're going to work and not be very, you know, dogmatic about I will only work 2 days in the office or I'll only work 3 days in the office, because I think the employer needs a little bit more flexibility themselves at the moment.
Some of the texts coming in, semi-states like the Injuries Board and their 80 staff are not being given the option of continuing from home after the 7th of September, even the option for blended work. Yet the government are promoting working remotely from home and from regional hubs. Surely what's good for the goose is good for the gander, or is it just more empty rhetoric and false claims? By the way, only 10% or less want this remote option, so why not allow it? That's from Derek in Killybegs in Donegal. A question for Richard. My wife has worked in a stationery shop as part of a larger office furniture supplier right through the pandemic, but her wages were cut by 20% as her employer had put her on the EWSS. Has she any rights? Presumably she wants to get back to 100% of her salary.
Well, the EWSS, she should be getting her full salary. So there's no right to cut out wages like that. So the EWSS is a payment to the employer, not a deduction on the employee. So that employee most definitely has an issue to raise with the employer. And if the employer doesn't give the back wages, then in those situations, it's down to the WRC for a wages claim. That's just not allowed. You can't go unilaterally cutting somebody's wages or salary. That's illegal.
That's illegal. OK, lots of tech workers want to go back to the office. It's all very well for senior management with nice spacious homes, but working from your cramped bedroom day in, day out at an inflated rent is no fun, says John. And question, what does your guest think about those who are being left working from home when others will be returned? Our roles have been deemed to be able to be kept at home. I worry that I'll always be overlooked for promotion or opportunity. Can I ask to be brought back? Now, how about that, Richard? Your place of work was the office. Now you've been working from home. The employer says, don't need you back. Possibly I need the space for, you know, social distancing and all the rest. So don't come in. But I want to come in.
Yeah, well, this is back to the contract. The contract says that's your place of work. And this issue of wanting to get back to the workplace, there's an awful lot of employees who would be concerned about future career prospects and the rest. And I'm sure your other people on will say the same. There's going to be a lot of people who really want to get back to the workplace. And some of it is going to be mental health issues. and that's also going to have to be dealt with. This is a real issue that is there, and I can see employees saying, I want to come back to the workplace and I'm legally entitled to from the 22nd of October.
All right. Well, look, we have to leave it there. Richard Grogan, employment law expert, Maeve McElwee, Director of Employer Relations at IBEC, and Peter Cosgrove, Managing Director of FutureWise. Thank you very much for joining us.